Hey, this review is a bit more impromptu, so it's not going to be as structured in terms of my delivery and everything I go into. This is just my preliminary thoughts after seeing the movie. Hopefully you enjoy and hopefully you get some kind of insight or just some ideas of how I felt about the movie from it. I just finished watching Godzilla vs. Kong, and I love kaiju movies. From Shin Godzilla to Pacific Rim to the classic Godzilla films, they've always appealed to me. But the human characters here, like many other recent monster films, aren't the greatest. I've always been a bit less judgmental on the human scenes in kaiju movies than other people, and not to say it's worse here, but the human storylines are just so poorly written. But if you're gonna have human characters and human plot lines, at least put a good amount of effort into their inclusion. Why are we following around a random conspiracy theorist and two children as they break into facilities without any trouble to find information that could have taken a couple minutes to set up at most to explain? Most of these kaiju movies have an issue with subpar human characters, aside from Kong Skull Island, and this movie unfortunately is no exception. When it comes to the fights that were in the film, they were top notch. Godzilla and Kong fighting in the ocean was great, the city fight was raw as hell, it was a lot more of what I like seeing in these movies. I gotta emphasize that even with the nitpicks and issues I'm going to bring up in a second, that doesn't take away from the fact that all of the fights here were great. They were amazing. They were easily the best the MonsterVerse has had so far and the highlight of the movie. I also thought the characterization for Kong was pretty well done. They did a good job giving character to him without the constant need for human characters to tell us everything. They really showed us his story and his feelings better than any of the movies previously. Also, another thing that got me excited at the beginning of the film was the opening credit stuff where it showed each of the monsters that have been defeated previously. It reminds me of the old Godzilla movies from the 80s and 90s for some reason, which I love. It also weirdly reminded me of the Incredibles when Mr. Incredible is using the computer to see the heroes that die. But before getting into any more negatives in the movie, I want to say I enjoyed this movie. If I gave it a number score, it'd be somewhere near the 6 and 7 range for me, but there were some nagging parts that I have heard echoed by other critics to some degree. But another problem that I don't know how many people are talking about is they spend a lot of time characterizing Kong and his place in the story, but Godzilla not only gets no characterization, but his actions don't really make any sense. How does Godzilla know which facilities to attack that have the big threat to him? They imply at one point in this film that the noise coming off of this thing is being heard by Godzilla halfway across the world, which is really dumb. You're telling me his hearing can hear something across the world while he's in the ocean and the other thing is underground? I'm being intentionally vague to avoid spoilers for this part of the story, don't worry. But let's call it how it is. There's no way Godzilla would know where the facilities were, at least in my perception of this movie. And if there was some good reason, the film doesn't really display it. The reason we don't know is because it spends so much time on Kong that Godzilla just gets sidelined weirdly, even though he's the other main character of this movie, supposedly. Also, this is a bit of a spoiler, but I have to talk about this. When Godzilla arrives in Hong Kong, why does he atomic breath the ground? At first, my thought was he was trying to destroy the threat he's been chasing during the movie, but the place the thing is at the far other end of the city. And on top of this, Godzilla atomic breaths for so long, he bores a hole through the center of the earth, right down to where Kong was. So did he do that to try and attack Kong? Or to try and bring him up to the surface? Nothing about this makes any sense and it was really bugging me during the movie. I know it's a kaiju movie, but unlike all the others that have come before, I was having a lot of issues with suspension of disbelief because there was a lot of absurd scenes that I thought were just a bit ridiculous. The atomic breath through the earth scene from earlier, Godzilla knowing where to go, all of this just points to the writing being extremely poor here. The human characters that were infiltrating the Apex facilities were just extras that just had so many scenes that dragged along. Also, I have to say, the fact that those human characters are essentially the reason the final battle is won also kind of ticks me off. I know it was kind of a small part, but for some random people to be able to tip the scales in the way they did kind of disrupts the flow of the fight for me personally. So it's tough. A lot of the issues I have with the film are nitpicks, but at the end of the day, all of those put together make the writing just really unbearable at times. The fights were good, stunning. The monsters and CGI looked amazing, but the human characters were still just as annoying as they have been previously, and the monster fights don't carry the film, even though they really were great. So I'm torn, but I'd say the film is decent overall. Better if not on par with Godzilla King of the Monsters, but as a movie, Kong Skull Island is a better movie by comparison for me. Anyway, this was a moment in review, just a quick review for the movie, and I hope to see you next time.